It was the summer of 2007 when I returned to my hometown, a quaint, almost forgotten little place nestled in the heart of the woods. The town, Ashford, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where secrets didn't stay secret for long. But there was one secret that the town kept hidden, one that I was about to uncover. I was 19 then, eager to escape the city's hustle and return to the slower pace of Ashford. My parents had moved away when I was a child, but the town always held a special place in my heart. My uncle, the only family I had left in Ashford, had recently passed away, leaving me his old cottage on the outskirts of town. The cottage was a quaint, two-story structure, surrounded by dense woods. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the city's never-ending noise. But that peace didn't last long. It started with the whispers. I'd hear them at night, soft, indistinct voices that seemed to come from the woods. At first I dismissed them as the wind or perhaps my imagination. But then the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Curiosity and a sense of unease drove me to ask around town. Most folks dismissed my questions with a nervous laugh or a shake of the head. But old Mrs. Henderson, the town librarian, leaned in close and whispered, "The woods have secrets, young man. Best you stay away." Her warning only fueled my curiosity. I started spending my evenings walking the edge of the woods, listening. The whispers seemed to be calling me, luring me deeper into the trees. One night, I ventured further than ever before. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow through the branches. The whispers were clearer now, almost like voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I stumbled upon an old, overgrown path that led deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier. I should have turned back, but I couldn't. Something was pulling me forward, an invisible force that I couldn't resist. The path led to a clearing, and in the center stood an ancient oak tree, its branches twisting towards the sky like gnarled fingers. The whispers were deafening now, surrounding me, enveloping me. As I approached the tree, I saw them. Figures, ethereal and translucent, circling the oak. They were the source of the whispers, their ghostly mouths moving in silent chants. Fear rooted me to the spot. The figures seemed to notice me, their hollow eyes turning in my direction. One by one, they began to drift towards me, their hands reaching out. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figures were inches away now, their cold, ghostly fingers brushing against my skin. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. And then, silence. The cold vanished. The whispers stopped. I opened my eyes to find the clearing empty. The figures were gone. I ran back to the cottage, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was safely inside, the door locked behind me. The next day, I visited Mrs. Henderson again. I told her what I had seen. She listened, her face growing paler with every word. When I finished, she took a deep breath and began to tell me a story. Decades ago, Ashford was a thriving community, but a strange illness swept through the town, one that no doctor could explain. People started disappearing, vanishing into the woods, never to be seen again. Those who went searching for the missing would return, but they were different. Hollow, empty shells of their former selves. The townsfolk believed it was a curse, one brought upon them by disturbing the ancient oak in the heart of the woods. They stopped going near the tree, and gradually the disappearances stopped. But the curse was never lifted, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice barely above a whisper. The spirits of those taken still wander the woods, trapped between worlds, and they are always searching, always whispering, looking for someone to take their place. I left Ashford the next day. The whispers still haunted my dreams, but they never followed me out of the town. Ashford's secret remained just that, a secret hidden in the heart of the woods. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself listening for the whispers, wondering if they'll ever find their peace. But some secrets are better left undisturbed, some whispers better left unanswered. It was the summer of 1996 when I returned to my hometown, a quaint, seemingly peaceful place nestled in the hills of Virginia. I'd left as a boy, but now, as a man, I was drawn back by the death of my estranged father. The town hadn't changed much. The same old diner still served the best apple pie, and Mr. Hargrove's general store was the hub of local gossip. But there was an undercurrent of tension I didn't remember from my childhood. The first odd thing happened the day after I arrived. I was walking past the old Willow Creek, the site of many boyhood adventures, when I heard whispers. Dismissing them as the wind, I continued, but the whispers grew into murmurs, as if a crowd was hidden among the trees. I ran home, my heart pounding. That night, I heard the story of the Willow Creek murders for the first time. In the early 1900s, a group of settlers had mysteriously disappeared around the creek. The locals whispered about a curse and avoided the area after sunset. The next day, I visited the town library to learn more. The librarian, a frail, elderly woman named Mrs. Dalton, looked uneasy when I inquired about the murders. She handed me a dusty old journal, its pages yellowed with age. The journal belonged to Jonathan Harker, one of the settlers who had vanished. His entries were mundane at first, but as I read on, they grew increasingly disturbed. He wrote of strange figures in the woods, bizarre symbols carved into trees, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. That evening, I decided to visit Willow Creek. The sun was setting as I arrived, casting long shadows over the water. The whispers started again, more insistent this time. I fought the urge to flee and instead began recording the sounds on my phone. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around to see Mrs. Dalton, her eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed. She told me that my father had been obsessed with the Willow Creek murders and had spent his last days poring over old documents and visiting the creek. Confused and frightened, I returned home. That night, I listened to the recording. Amidst the static, I could hear faint, distorted voices. They were speaking in an old dialect, saying something about a sacrifice and a gate. The next morning, I confronted Mrs. Dalton. She reluctantly admitted that the town had a dark secret. Many years ago, a cult had operated in the area, performing rituals by the creek. My father had discovered their descendants were still active and were planning something. I couldn't leave the mystery unsolved. That night, armed with a flashlight and my father's old revolver, I went back to Willow Creek. The whispers were louder, more aggressive. I followed them to a hidden clearing where I saw figures in hooded robes standing around an altar. Horrified, I realized they had seen me. I turned to run, but was grabbed by strong hands. The cultists surrounded me, their leader removing his hood. It was Mr. Hargrove, the store owner. He spoke of an ancient entity that the cult worshipped, one that required a blood sacrifice to keep the town safe. I struggled, but it was futile. Just as Mr. Hargrove raised a knife, a gunshot rang out. Mrs. Dalton stood at the edge of the clearing, a smoking gun in her hand. In the chaos, I managed to break free and run. The police arrived soon after, but the cultists had vanished. Mrs. Dalton and I told them everything. Investigations were launched, but no one else in town spoke a word about the cult. I left Virginia soon after, the memories of that night haunting me. Even now, I wonder if the entity they worshipped was real, lurking in the shadows of Willow Creek, waiting for its next sacrifice. The whispers still echo in my dreams, a chilling reminder of the horror that lies beneath the surface of that small town. I never believed in ghost stories, not until I visited Eldridge Hollow. It was a quaint, forgotten town, nestled in the crook of a dense forest, far from the bustling city where I lived. My journey there was unintended, a wrong turn during a road trip with friends. We were looking for adventure, but what we found in Eldridge Hollow was something far more sinister. The town was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The locals were few and far between, each carrying a look of unease, as if guarding a dark secret. We checked into a small inn, planning to leave first thing in the morning. That night, I couldn't shake off a feeling of being watched. It started with small, inexplicable things. Objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night, and chilling drafts that seemed to appear from nowhere. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, as I lay in bed, I saw it. A shadowy figure at the foot of my bed, its form barely distinguishable in the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, but the unease in my heart grew. Curiosity and fear drove me to seek answers. I started asking the locals about the town's history. Most were reluctant to speak, but an old man, Mr. Jenkins, agreed to tell me the truth. He spoke of a tragedy that befell the town many years ago, an unexplained event that took the lives of several townspeople. Since then, he claimed, the town had been haunted by the spirits of those lost souls. I was skeptical, but Mr. Jenkins's story filled me with a sense of dread. The more I learned, the more I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me. The hauntings escalated. Whispering voices filled my nights, and I started seeing the shadowy figure more frequently, always just out of reach. My friends thought I was losing my mind, but I knew I had to find out what was haunting Eldridge Hollow. One night, I followed the shadow into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting like gnarled hands. In a clearing, I saw them, the spirits of the townspeople, their faces twisted in eternal anguish. They spoke in unison, their voices a chilling echo in the night, telling me the story of their untimely deaths, a tale of betrayal, and a cursed relic that brought ruin to the town. The spirits led me to an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. Inside, hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, was the relic, a small, unassuming object that radiated malevolence. As I touched it, visions of the past flooded my mind. A ritual gone wrong, unleashing a darkness that consumed the town. I knew what I had to do. With the help of Mr. Jenkins, I performed a ritual to cleanse the relic and set the spirits free. It was a night of terror and turmoil, but as dawn broke, the shadowy figure appeared one last time, nodding in gratitude before vanishing into the light. As we left Eldridge Hollow, the town seemed different, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The locals smiled, a genuine warmth in their eyes for the first time. I knew I'd never forget my time in that small, haunted town, a place where I learned that some ghost stories might just be true. I still think about Eldridge Hollow, about the spirits and the darkness that once lurked there. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are rooted in reality, hidden in the shadows of small towns with forgotten histories. I never thought something so terrifying could happen in our small, sleepy town. Growing up here, the most excitement we ever had was the annual fall fair. That was until the autumn of 2016, when everything changed. It started subtly. People around town reported hearing strange noises at night, a kind of low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the woods surrounding our town. I heard it too, one night, while walking home from my friend Mike's house. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a primal warning that something was very wrong. The local police brushed it off as a wild animal, maybe a bear or a coyote, but I knew the sounds of the animals in our area, and this was different. It was more menacing, more human. Then, pets started to disappear. First, it was Mrs. Henderson's cat, then a couple of dogs from the other end of town. People were upset, but again, wild animal attacks were blamed. The real panic started when Old Man Jenkins, the town recluse, went missing. He was known to wander into the woods, so at first no one was overly concerned. But when he didn't show up for his weekly grocery trip, people began to whisper. I decided to investigate. I gathered a few friends, including Mike, and we set out into the woods. We weren't prepared for what we found. In a clearing, deep in the forest, was Old Man Jenkins's hat, torn and bloodied, next to what looked like drag marks leading further into the woods. We followed the trail, hearts pounding, until we reached a small, dilapidated cabin. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was stale, and there was a feeling of utter wrongness. We found no sign of Old Man Jenkins, but there were symbols drawn on the walls in what looked like blood. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, a series of circles and strange, angular lines. We heard a noise behind us and turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, or something that used to be a man. His eyes were wild, and his skin was pale and stretched over his bones like paper. He spoke in a language I didn't understand, his voice a guttural whisper. We ran, not stopping until we burst out of the woods and into the safety of the town. We told our parents, the police, anyone who would listen, but when they went to check, the cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. People started to avoid the woods. Rumors spread of a curse, of a man who had dabbled in things he shouldn't have and paid the price. They said he was stuck between worlds, neither alive nor dead, and that he was the one making the noises, taking the pets, and who had taken Old Man Jenkins. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. More people went missing, always close to the woods. The town was gripped by fear. No one went out after dark, and everyone locked their doors. Then, one night, the growling returned, louder and closer than ever before. It was right outside my window. I was frozen in fear, unable to move or scream. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. In the morning, there were footprints outside my window, footprints that were too large to be human. The incidents slowly decreased after that night. People still talk about what happened, about the man in the woods and the curse, but no one knows for sure. The woods remain a place of fear, a reminder of the horror that descended upon our small town. I still live here, but I never go near the woods. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the growling, a distant reminder of the terror that once gripped our town. I know better now. There are things in this world that we don't understand, and some mysteries are better left unsolved.